Okay, right. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Nigel Hicks, and this evening's talk is entitled "Is Summer Photography a Waste of Time?" Well, it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek title, but it's something that I've heard people say quite a few times over the years to me, and I'm kind of a little bit mystified by it. Obviously, I don't think it is, but I can understand to some extent why people might think it is, because at first glance, it can be quite problematic taking photographs in the middle of summer, but it's only problematic, really, if you try to carry on in exactly the same way that you would photograph in, say, spring and autumn. You have to sort of make a few changes. And as always with different seasons, different things work well at different times of the year. And there are certain things in summer which can only be photographed in summer. And we'll come, hopefully I shall work through some of those and I'll give you some ideas and inspiration for photography that can be done over the next few months. Obviously, by summer, I'm just sort of defining it as June, July, August, and to some extent early September. But that's the main sort of period for the UK. And I'm giving this talk. I'm really focusing on summer in the UK, the kind of photography that you might do here at this time of year. So the reason I think that summer photography gets a bit of a bad rap is because of, well, primarily due to landscape photography. I think it can be a bit of a challenge because what you end up with a lot of landscape photography in summer is this kind of thing, which it looks nice enough, but it's completely blue sky, which is always welcome for general life, but not necessarily good for atmospheric, moody landscape photography. And the sun's awfully high. The green of the leaves are reflecting light all over the place. The shadows are really short, and it just looks, well, I say it looks summery, you might say, which is quite nice, but it lacks any mood and atmosphere. I mean, this is what you would expect, certainly in the middle of the day, but actually this is taken at 8 a.m., so it's still quite early. But of course, at this time of year, the sun comes up so early. This is already 8 a.m. 8 a.m. is already 4 or 3.5 hours after sunrise. Um, so the sun's already pretty high in the sky, and it just doesn't work from the moody atmospheric point of view. And similarly with this kind of thing, with the sun even higher, so it's about 10:30 in the morning, the sky is washed out. The sun is coming in from sort of top right, so the scene is backlit, and we've got deep shadows and bright highlights and lots of light reflecting off the sunlit leaves, and it's quite rich in blue light as well in a way. It's just not. It looks okay, but it's not really sort of the moody atmospheric sort of stuff that most people associate with landscape photography these days, at least anyway. And then if you sort of trying to do some nice landscape photography on a beach somewhere, you might just end up with this kind of thing, which for landscape photography is a little bit of a disaster. This is Fistral Beach, I should say, at Newquay in Cornwall, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so really peak time. Of course, and for moody atmospheric landscape photography, this is just exactly what you don't want. You want an nice empty beach. So you might need to turn up at about 6 a.m. really, something like that. And after a new tide has also washed away all the footprints and so on. But of course, if actually you're involved in a travel photography project, which this was part of, then this is absolutely perfect because it really shows you travel photography in the southwest of England at its peak. And it would certainly gladden the heart of any Cornwall Tourism Bureau official to actually see this kind of thing. The sun's awfully high, but that kind of increases the sort of feeling of heat and the sense that it's summer, which obviously the crowd tells you it's summer anyway. But definitely not good for landscape photography, but great for tourism, travel photography. And even if you're not really trying to photograph this kind of thing, but need to get hold of with other things, sometimes you just have to put up with this kind of crowd, at least briefly, in order to get this kind of photograph. So looking at events that happen in the summer, obviously surfing happens all year round, but surfing events, competitions like this one generally are only in the summer. And this is at Fistral Beach in Newquay. And so again, it's taken in the middle of the day, so the sun is way too high, etc. But competitions and festivals and events generally take place in the middle of the day, and so you often have to go with simply what the conditions that are thrown at you and make the most of them. And in this example, then we're really homing in on sort of capturing the drama and the energy and the action of the event rather than worrying too much about the light. And other festivals, other events you might want to go to, which again, middle of the day, this kind of thing. This is the Bath and West show. Surprisingly, it's near Bath. That big agricultural show happens about this time every year. And well, crazy way to make a living, but this makes us some great photographs of motorcyclists flying through the air. Typically in the middle of the day, got a nice bit of blue sky. Sun's too high, of course, but it provides you with lots of light in which to use a fast shutter speed to really capture the movement here and freeze that movement. And it's sort of something that you would, definitely something that happens only in midsummer. So this is the kind of thing you want to try and catch. And then another festival, Sidmouth Folk Festival, down on the south coast or east coast of Devon, I suppose I should say, really. And again, it's crowded, it's sun's high, etc. But it's an event, and it's a really atmospheric event with lots of fun, and it's nice to really capture the mood and the sort of the joy, I suppose, the happiness of what's going on. Nice to have it with a bit of sunshine, but you don't necessarily need sunshine for this kind of thing. In fact, sometimes a little bit of flat light is a little bit easier to handle in a crowd situation like this. But anyway, if you're at well, this is a folk festival, say, in cinema. Other music festivals like this one. This is Camp Festival in Dorset. Obviously, music festivals tend to go on into the evening, so then you can make the most of the evening light, nice low golden evening light. And in this instance, of course, backlit, the sunlight shining through the flags, and you really get a sense of a warm atmosphere and a very moody image. So again, music festivals through the summer, shot mainly nicely in the evening when the action is really starting to get going, and it really comes up with some nice mood and energy. And then moving further on into the evening, into dusk, and you really can capture sort of pictures of the crowd watching what's going on, taking part in what's going on. In this case, I think it was George Ezra that was on stage here. This is actually at Boardmasters in Newquay, which is held every August, usually every August anyway. And so just at dusk, so the light levels are getting pretty low, having to put the ISO up, and really just having to use a fairly short telephoto lens and then a high ISO and a faster shutter speed to capture what's going on. And then moving on a little bit further into dusk, actually, and then Camp Festival again is just a wonderful piece of action here. Camera on a tripod, use a slow shutter speed and fire the flash so that you put some light onto the people as they swing by. But they're sufficiently blurred that for the most part they're unidentifiable. But the blur actually gives you really the sense of energy and movement. I really quite like this picture as a sort of an action shot taken in the evening at a summer festival. Not always do you, of course, get sunshine, surprisingly, in a British summer for a festival, and it can actually be quite a good thing not to have sunshine always. As long as you've got good light levels, sometimes without sunshine it works better. And if you can imagine photographing this bull here in bright sunlight, the amount of light that you would get bouncing off this bull's face would be quite phenomenal, and it really would probably burn out. It'd be very hard to get a picture. I like this picture a lot because I quite like the sort of the love that clearly is the love that this woman clearly has for her bull. I think is quite touching. I always find it quite pleasing. We had quite a long conversation about cows and bulls and things at this event. This was an agricultural show in East Devon. Actually, this was a couple of years ago. And then moving on now to insects. Of course, insects only in summer and only at the height of summer. Well, I know spring as well, I suppose, and to some extent autumn, but mostly in midsummer. And we can get a lot of nice butterfly and various other insect activities, mostly in good sunlight. This one's taken in quite soft, even lighting, which is quite nice because it means I don't have bright highlights and deep shadows coming over the flower, and also around the butterfly as well. This is a brimstone butterfly. I forget what the flower is actually, but it's a brimstone. As I say, it's photographed in quite soft light, but it's in the middle of the day, 1 o'clock. So the sun would be very high if it was sunny, but fortunately the light is quite soft and it's quite even across the butterfly and across the flower too. But for the insects photographed in bright sunlight, you really need this kind of thing. This is damselflies mating, and they're backlit by a very bright sunlight, but it's really highlighting the structures of these two insects. Sunlight shining through their wings, and then also on their thoraxes and their heads, picking out the hairs on their bodies. It's just wonderful. And the black behind them actually is quite a dense forest. It's just that the sunlight coming through to the insects is so bright that the background is massively underexposed, and so they've gone completely dark. But this is one of the kinds of things that I like to try to capture in summer. This is taken at about 4 p.m., so the sun is starting to get a little bit lower, but it's still nevertheless quite high and as I say, very, very bright. There's no flash or anything used in this. It really is just the sunlight backlighting these two insects. And then we move on to migratory birds. And in this instance, the cuckoo, very hard bird to get a hold of. First of all, you've got to know where they are because there aren't very many sites around the place where there still are cuckoos. This one I managed to capture on Dartmoor a couple of years ago. There are a few places on Dartmoor where they're still quite common, and this was one such spot. And again, it's very much the summer, well, late May through to end of July, perhaps. I'm not sure if they're around in September or not, but certainly through, or even August. Not sure if they're around in August, but certainly late May, June, and July is peak time to find cuckoos. And if you can be patient enough, and if you can follow them around perhaps a little bit, then you can get some shots like this once you've actually managed to work out the locations where they hang out. Obviously taken with a long telephoto lens. This actually is a 400mm lens with a 2x converter on it. So actually 800mm lens on a camera that was a crop sensor, so lots of magnification going on. And yeah, so a tricky subject, but one that's really worth pursuing at this time of year if you possibly can. And then on the sort of the migratory bird kind of front, marine birds. This a gannet photographed at Bempton Cliffs near Bridlington in Yorkshire. Uh, the, most of the marine birds, they come and breed on our shores for a few months in the summer, mostly May through to July. The gannet actually is the exception. They hang around until October, so May to October for gannets. But gannets actually are mostly on offshore islands. But Bridlington, sorry, the Kip Cliffs at Bempton, that's on the mainland, and as I think, as far as I know, this is the only gannet breeding site on the UK mainland. All the others are on offshore islands. So this is one of the most accessible spots to photograph gannets. And I say this was taken late June, I think it was, a couple of years ago, late June or early July. So at the height of the breeding season. So you see this bird is in fine plumage and is as I say, on this cliff side. This is 400mm lens taken at 6:30 in the morning. So the cliffs face east. So I wanted to be there when the sun was shining in onto the cliffs, coming in off the sea, and obviously then the sun is still quite low. It's only about half an hour after sunrise, so the light still is quite golden and rich, as you can see in the colours of the grass, and the light actually generally on the bird as well is still quite warm. And then you have the charismatic and iconic puffin. This one photographed in the Farne Islands, Northumberland. And this was been end of June, this was. And well, this is puffin with sand eels. It can't get more iconic than that, really. It's actually strongly desired. One of the problems with a place like the Farne Islands, of course, is its access is strictly controlled. Only a couple of the islands are open to visitors at all, and even then only for a few hours of the day. And so you're inevitably having to go to a place like this in the middle of the day when the sun is really high, which is photographically not the best, but it's nevertheless still works quite nicely. It's not as atmospheric. The light is not as atmospheric as that at Bempton Cliffs, but it works reasonably well. And as you can see, you get plenty of light to capture. You get your photographs of puffins. We look at this shot. This is also the Farne Islands. This is more a landscape kind of view, showing thousands and thousands of guillemots. And it's taken at 10 a.m. So that's fairly early-ish in the morning in terms of being allowed to go to the Farne Islands. So the sun is not incredibly high, but it's high enough to make the light a little bit too brassy, a little bit too bright. But nevertheless, it works reasonably well. It sort of demonstrates the breeding colony quite well, at least, even if it's not the most atmospheric of landscape shots. Those of you who've been to Northumberland probably will have also noticed that just how incredibly clear the light is there. So when the sun is shining, it really is very strong and very brassy. But you can see with the background of this view, the distance you can see the visibility is just phenomenal. So that's quite stunning. But nevertheless, the high bright light is a little excuse me, a little bit too strong on the cliffs. And from here, we'll move on to plants. And of course, the inevitable poppies, which you absolutely must photograph right now, this time of year, through June, early July. This one, these photographed in a field in Somerset, actually, but there are lots of great places to photograph poppies all over the place, of course. And then in some areas, again, near Newquay, there's an area of just several fields that have been given over almost entirely to poppies. So you get massive views of poppies, which are just really worth looking at if you can. This one taken with a really high sun, 11 a.m. The sun is too high, really, but I was there, and so I just shot it anyway. It was one of the best collections of poppies I'd seen in the area at that time, so I just grabbed it, and it really comes out with a nice, the classic sort of poppy shot. The sun is a bit too high in this shot. When I look at it, I can see that, but it's nevertheless quite atmospheric and quite dramatic. Well, not dramatic, but illustrative of poppies as we see them in the fields in the UK. And then move on further into summer, and of course heather from about July through to early September, end of June, early July through to early or mid-September. It's a really common flower, of course, across most of the UK. There are 5 species of heather in Britain. This is bell heather. In this instance, photographed with sun behind it is backlit. I think the sun is kind of coming from the right a little bit, but it's backlit, so the sun is shining through the flowers, and I think that really lights them up really rather nicely and gives us a sort of a slightly different, slightly unusual view of this flower. It's photographed at 8:30 in the morning, so the sun is still relatively low. Low enough to give us some nice backlighting. If the sun were really high, so by about midday, we wouldn't get this nice atmospheric backlighting. It would be a little bit, well, it'd be sort of lighting from the top really rather than behind, so it'd be quite different. Okay, so then we're going to move on and do some landscapes, so segue from the heather close-up flowers to the heathers on the hillside. I'm going to show some landscape photography taken, at sort of the right time of day. Hopefully, this one is. Well, this is on Bossington Hill in Exmoor National Park in Somerset. The hills in the far distance. That's my brain's gone blank. I've forgotten the name of the hill now. But anyway, this is the highest point on Exmoor. That's what I'm going to try and say. This is actually photographed at 10 a.m., which is also 9 a.m. in August. So the sun is a little bit higher than I would have hoped it would be. But the trouble was I turned up at 6 a.m. hoping to be able to photograph this view very early, 6:30, 7 a.m. But the whole place was blanketed in fog, so I really couldn't actually get anything very much in terms of this kind of view anyway. And it had to wait until 9 a.m. for the fog to clear. You can see over on the hills it is actually clearing a little bit. The hill is Dunkery Beacon. That's what it is. That's the name has come back to me. So the fog is still a little bit over here, but you can see it's just lifting off. The sun is a little bit too high, but it's not bad. This landscape is quite nicely lit up, and the heather and the gorse here is actually takes your attention and leads you into the picture. And that's reasonably well lit without the sun being too strong and too bright. I think because of the fog is still there and giving us burning off slowly as cloud, and it's kind of softening and filtering the light a little bit. So it's not brassy, strong sunlight, but somewhat filtered and a little bit less intense than it might have been had it been a completely clear sky. Now we move on back to Northumberland again, and Bamburgh Castle on the Northumberland coast, photographed in June. So taken at 5 p.m. and it looks kind of quite nice. The sky certainly, the clouds are very dramatic with a storm in the background there. And this highland over here, this is part of the Farne Islands. It's quite close to shore, as you can see. But it's still 5 p.m. For Northumberland, that's still nearly 5 hours before sunset. So the sun is still quite high in the sky, off to the right here, shining in this way from the northwest. And it's nice enough, but it's not quite as atmospheric as you might like. come back a couple of hours later, 7:30 p.m., with the sun now shining strongly from the right and much lower. We have a much more atmospheric picture, really nice, warm light. Yeah, warm and warming light, nice and rich in reds and yellows. And it's really a much more atmospheric, much more pleasing kind of shot. Similar kind of thing with this image, which it shows the Dorset coast near Abbotsbury in the Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site, and we're looking along Chesil Beach towards Portland in the distance there. And it is photographed in the evening. This is 6:30 p.m. It says in early September, so the sun is getting reasonably low. We're definitely into evening sunlight here, and really with this particular view, we're looking east. So it really is pretty much the only time of day in which to photograph this view is the evening. If you photograph it at almost any other time of day, you're looking almost into the light. And it doesn't really work terribly well, especially when the sun is high. It really doesn't work at all well. And the other thing about this view, it's actually quite a long distance. Portland there is about 10 miles away, probably, around about 10 miles, probably more actually. So you really can't have much, if any, haze. And here we got a reasonably clear day, a little bit of haze in the distance, I think, but really not too bad at all. It's pretty clear, so we've got a nice clear shot all the way through to Portland. So again, evening shot, so the sun is coming over from the right-hand side. You can see from the shadows on the trees there, where the sun is coming in from the right. You really can't shoot it any other time. If you shot it with the sun in the south, it'd be coming in on the side, which wouldn't be too bad, but in the middle of the day, the sun is too high for this view. It really sort of washes out and doesn't look great. And also, normally we'll have a bit more haze, and so the Portland in the distance would be just a bit too hazy, it wouldn't quite work. So evening sunlight for this, and just a nice view from the hillside above the village of Abbotsbury, at the eastern end of this lake here, which is called the Fleet. So that's a couple of shots from the evening. Obviously, we had Bossington Hill taken sort of morning, but not too early, and then some evening shots. Now we've got the early morning. This is the other option, of course, is really early morning, but this is 6 a.m. straight after sunrise. The sun is just risen, so you see it's still very reddish, very warm. And sort of the big benefit of the early morning photography, if you're anywhere near water or at least a wet landscape, not necessarily open water, but a landscape that's quite wet, is mist. And that could be just, of course, it can ruin your photography if it turns into thick, dense fog, as it did with my export shot. But it can also be incredibly atmospheric if you've got the right kind of mist here. This mist is actually lifting off quite quickly, so only just caught it just in time, but it adds a layer of atmosphere, which you don't usually very rarely have with evening photography. I say sort of I get mist not just in a watery landscape, but also just in a wet one. So talk about sort of landscapes where you've got solid ground, but which it's very damp. Either it's low lying and it's a little bit marshy, like the Somerset Levels, or it's just you've had heavy rain the day before and then the sky is clear and it's gone quite chilly and no wind. Then early the next morning at sunrise, you might well have some mist rising up off the wet ground, and you get some nice atmospheric pictures that way as well. So if you bear to get out of bed at 4 in the morning to actually drive to wherever you need to be, unless you happen to be really close to the right location already, and get there in time for sunrise, it's 5:30, 6 o'clock, whenever it might be, then you may well be rewarded with some beautiful misty shots. But of course, as always with mist, you really cannot completely predict it. It's a roll of dice. It's always a tricky thing. And then moving on a little bit later, this is the same morning, but 6:30. So it's half an hour later. So sun is coming up a little bit higher, but still very atmospheric, still very warm, very golden. Still a little bit of mist in the air, and the ground is actually quite wet here. As you can see, that's actually quite wet. Then we've got a little bit of mist coming off the ground here still, but it's dissipating quite quickly. But we have some fantastic backlighting on this tree and on the sheep. And I've shown this image a few times to number of groups, and it's always I think it's always a great shot. I never get tired of showing it. Hopefully you don't get tired of seeing it. Actually, that's a point. But anyway, nice atmospheric shot taken at 6:30 in the morning. That's right. Backlit, of course, giving us these beautiful shadows and highlights. And if we move on Another landscape image, and this is by one shot that's not in the UK. This is on the west coast of Ireland, taken at about 6 p.m. in July, and so sunset here would be about 9:30 or so, maybe quarter to 10. It's quite a good bit later on the west coast of Ireland than it is in most of the UK. So it's several hours before sunset, so the sun is still reasonably high, but it's coming in from over here, sort of top right. And because it's kind of backlighting the landscape, it's quite dramatic. So although the sun's a bit high, the fact that it's dramatic lighting kind of overcomes that problem of the sun being high and perhaps being rather brassy. It actually gives us a really quite a dramatic effect, backlighting these grasses and so on. So really nice atmospheric picture. I wouldn't necessarily say moody, but certainly atmospheric and effective, and quite a strong, impactful image. I would say not atmospheric, but strong, impactful image. And for those of you who've ever heard me talking about photographing beaches, well, this is an absolute classic example of how you photograph a beach. You don't photograph the beach because if you do, all you get is this big empty expanse of sand. You have something photographically in the foreground to actually grab the viewer's attention and lead you into the scene behind that sets the context of the beach. So that's the kind of idea with this kind of landscape. And yeah, so this is kind of one of my sort of favorite images. Most of this I've shown you so far has been in sunshine. Of course, the sun never stops shining in summer. It's always sunny, except when it isn't, of course. So there are a lot of landscapes you can photograph on cloudy days, and which in fact are best photographed on cloudy days. And this kind of thing, woodland and woodland river view, that's definitely one of those scenes that's much better photographed on a cloudy day than it is in bright sunlight. If this was sunny, just imagine what it would be like. It would be bright highlights bouncing off the leaves. There would be bright highlights bouncing off all these rocks. The water over here would be in deep, deep shadow. The white water would be burning out as well. It would be a real mess of highlights and shadows, and it would be really not a great shot to look at. But photographed on a very cloudy day, it was actually getting quite gloomy because it was about to rain. The lighting is nice and flat and get nice even lighting across everything, and the greens are really rich. It's early summer, so the greens are rich anyway because it's not long since the trees leafed out. But the colours are also very rich because of the nice flat lighting and the low levels of lighting as well. So always think about photographing on cloudy days, and just don't give up because it's cloudy. Just choose your subject matter carefully. Make sure you go to a place where where that is suitable for cloudy days, such as woodlands and rivers and so on. So yeah, don't just give up because it's cloudy. That would be a real crime. And another thing that works really well on cloudy days is garden photography. That's all. That's best as well, rather than bright sunlight, for the same reasons as the woodland photography. Just outline as bright highlights and deep shadows as torrential scenes. All right in soft sunlight, but bright sunlight would really just be too brassy. But here we got sort of cloudy day, fairly bright cloudy day, but nevertheless the lighting is reasonably even and soft. So it really shows up and lights up the garden quite nicely in a nice even sort of way, and very rich and green and verdant as well. It's nice. This is taken at a place called Mapperton, which is a house in Dorset. I realised actually after I put this picture in this tank, a pond, lake, swimming pool, whatever it is, the water level's really very low, so it's a little bit distracting in the foreground once you realise that, but never mind. But then, as I say, soft sunlight does work reasonably well, or actually very well for certain situations. Particularly buildings always works quite nicely. This is Ford Abbey on the Somerset Dorset border, and it worked quite well in cloudy weather as well, because I photographed this in cloudy weather about an hour or so before this. But the soft sunlight picture did seem to come up much better. It sort of the reflection in the lake was much more pleasing with little bit of sunlight, and the trees and the vegetation showed up a little bit better as well. So again, it's something that you wouldn't want in brassy, really bright, strong, brassy sunlight, but this is quite nice, soft sunlight filtered by a bit of cloud, which is not thick enough to cut the sunlight out, but which is enough to actually soften the light. And obviously, when you're photographing or when you're visiting places like this, just simply as a visitor, a fee-paying visitor, then you're constrained about to the times that you can go in So inevitably, you're going to be photographing at times when the sun is quite high. In this instance, it's 11 a.m. and it's in August, so the sun is quite high. But I think it doesn't matter too much in this scene. It works quite well. It lights up quite nicely. I think had to be been able to get the sun lower, of course, the sun would have been in a completely different position. But later in the day, the sun this might be quite a nice golden lighting on the building, perhaps coming from behind where I'm standing. I think it would be. Um, so yeah, so then more building pictures in much stronger sunlight, but evening sunlight. And this is the kind of thing that, again, great stuff, great thing for tourism, travel photography. I mean, the buildings are quite nice in themselves, but really it's the combination of colors, just the and shapes as well, the combinations of colors and shapes, the sort of vertical rectangles of the different colors of the buildings com combined with this sudden strong triangle of a red triangle of a boat sail. I think it really is quite jarring, but at the same time quite invigorating and energizing as well. And I think that's quite really a wonderful thing. So evening sunlight taken at about 5:30 in July, so it's actually still quite early, but nevertheless we start to get a little bit of evening color, and I think it's really quite gives nice, strong, rich colors. Sort of thing to really look out for. This is actually taken in the old harbour in Weymouth. Yeah, I always quite like this picture. It's part of my Dorset project a couple of years ago. But of course, then there's the evening shots when it's starting to get dark or when it's nearly dark. Always best with this kind of urban scene. Again, this is the old harbour in Weymouth again. Is to photograph it when there's still some light in the sky. I kind of left it almost a little bit late here, possibly, but it's still some light in the sky there, and that's working quite well. If you leave it till it's completely dark, then what you see is you find it quite difficult to see the outlines of the roofs against the sky. And it's not always easy to tell where the buildings end and the sky begins. With the front of these buildings lit up, that possibly wouldn't be an issue with this place, but very often you need to have a bit of light in the sky to make sure you can really get good definition on the edges of the buildings and the roofs of the buildings. But a nice atmospheric shot, obviously camera on a tripod, long exposure, probably not too long actually, because those boats will be moving a little bit, even though they're tightly moored to the wall there. And so it's sort of a good atmospheric summer evening shot. Then, of course, finally, you want to photograph right in the middle of the night. This is taken on Holy Island in Lindisfarne, Northumberland, at about 2 a.m. with the sun dropping down towards sorry, not the sun, the moon dropping down towards moonset over in the west, and yeah, I always find this picture very atmospheric. It's very, very blue, and that's because it's nighttime and there is no direct light coming from the sun. All the light is reflected. So once the sun's gone below the horizon, what happens is that the red light doesn't reach you anymore. It gets absorbed, and then all the light that reaches you is bounced and deflected around, and that is always blue light because it has a lot more energy to keep on traveling, no matter how much it gets bounced around. And so at night you get this very strong blue lighting, which works quite nicely in this. I was actually there trying to photograph the night sky. I thought it'll be great on Lindisfarne. There'll be no light pollution, and I'll be able to photograph the night sky. I had overlooked the fact that there was quite a strong moon that night, and also, of course, Lindisfarne is a long way north, and in June you don't it doesn't go completely dark. Of course, that's actually an issue over the most of the UK, even down in the far south where I am. In June, July, the sky is not really dark enough for good night sky photography, and certainly when you go far north, it's really not good enough at all. I found when I did about midnight, I found that there was still some pink and red in the sky towards the northwest, and quite a bit of light there, which is making it difficult to see any stars in the rest of the sky. And then by 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m., the dawn was coming up in the northeast, and the two were merging. We had the dusk light in the northwest and the dawn light in the northeast spreading right across the sky, across the northern sky, and merging, and actually getting more and more light, messing up any view of the stars. So I didn't get any stars that night. So the moral of the tale, of course, is don't bother trying to do night sky photography in the middle of the summer unless you can be absolutely certain of a place with no light pollution and where the sun where it really does get dark, if you can find such a place. And so instead, we have this beautiful moonset image taken a little bit out of desperation, really, but it was a nice image. Anyway, so that's really what I was going to talk about, just the usual end thing. The next talk is going to be 25th of September. It's going to be about long exposure. I've touched on this before, but that was low lights, purely about low light photography. This is going to include low light, but it's going to be getting how to get long exposure taken during the middle of the day as well. So it's going to cover all sorts of aspects of using long exposure, getting long exposure photography, using filters and so on to actually increase your exposure time so that you can do long exposures. And then moving on from that, the first autumn workshop is going to be 7th of September. It's Devon South Coast at Big Bree and Burr Island, on the south coast of Devon, believe it or not. And say on 7th of September, and then that's followed on the 15th, probably by a garden photography workshop. And then the 22nd or 21st of September, I think it's 22nd, in Lyme Regis and Charmouth for the Jurassic Coast, and so on, then into October as well with Exmoor and Dartmoor. And then, of course, the Wild West Cornwall Photography Tour. We still have a couple of spaces on that, running 3rd to the 8th of November. So if anybody wants to come along, please let me know. Please sign up. It would be fantastic to have you there. I think it's going to be a great tour, providing, of course, the weather cooperates, which I'm sure it will. And then also talking of Cornwall, got a new edition of Beautiful Cornwall. This book up here got a new edition of Beautiful Cornwall coming out in a few weeks. Should be out by mid-July. So updated. Some of the photography is the same, but some of it's completely changed. So it's going to be a new look book, but new edition, new look. Hopefully you'll like it. And apart from that, then just go on and please enjoy your summer photography, and hope you have a great time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then if anybody wants to ask me some questions, then please do so. Obviously, turn your microphone on before you do that. If you want to turn your camera on as well, then please feel free to. But then, of course, be aware that you will be visible in the recording that will go onto YouTube later on. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please fire away. I hope you do.
Do you have a favourite focal length for your landscapes, Nigel? Is there one focal length that you tend to go to that you enjoy the most?
I wouldn't say any particular focal length. Most of my landscapes are taken with a wide angle lens. It's true. It does depend on exactly what kind of landscape it is, but a lot of it is wide angle, ranging from 17mm through to 35mm. So there's no one particular focal length that is my favorite. It just really whatever works, I suppose, for the scene. Yeah. What gives me the right effects, and also to some extent what's possible as well. Of course, that sometimes is the case. You're not always able to get the ideal view. Sadly, sometimes is a bit of a compromise. There's always various things you need to compromise. Sadly, so but I'm trying to avoid that. Yeah, if I possibly can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Nigel, that image you choose, the last one from Holy Island in the middle of the night.
Oh yeah.
How did you determine the exposure?
Okay, I kept trying to remember this particular shot. I can't remember what the actual exposure time was, but I suspect it was probably within the 30-second limits of the camera's exposure time. Obviously, I suspect I probably would have opened the lens aperture up fairly wide, 5.6 or 8. Probably wouldn't want to do it too wide because there's good depth of field in that picture, so I wouldn't want to have it too wide open. So say even if f8, then the moon is pretty bright, and actually also because I had the dawn coming up behind me, so there was a surprising amount of light on those posts. So I suspect that probably the exposure time was within the 30 seconds maximum limit. So the camera's exposure meter would be reading the exposure quite accurately, quite reasonably well. So wasn't a problem, but I can check it and let you know later if you like. just to see exactly what the exposure time was.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so if nobody else has any questions, I shall wind it up this evening. And if, yeah, well, I shall wind it up, and then obviously the recording will go on to YouTube next week sometime. And I wish you a great evening, and you can now get back to watching Scotland. The second half of the Scotland match versus Switzerland will be coming up fairly soon. So I'll talk to you again soon. Ian, did you have?
Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank
Oh,
you.
you're very welcome. Careful, you had another question coming then.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you in September, hopefully, either on a workshop or on the next talk. And we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you very much. Bye. Bye-bye.
You, Nigel.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.